Okay, look, I need help. My siblings are going to fucking kill me. I've always been the odd one out among the four of us. From a very young age, we learned how to play the house's games. We had been brought up knowing it was alive. Like us, it had a soul, and it liked to play games with us. Every day since we were little kids, a new game would be scrawled across the main lobby. For example, on each of our birthdays, a simple question would be our gift. And as children born on its premises, it was our job to crack it. Running around the house with my siblings in tow, I tracked down an ancient painting in the hallway, where a key was taped to the back. That key led us to a secret box in the living room, containing all of my wrapped birthday gifts. I never questioned our home had a soul. I guess as a little kid, I thought it was kind of magic. When the house announced its basement games, I was so excited. But when it came to playing the basement games, I wasn't allowed. Instead, the house would usher me upstairs. I figured there was a reason. Maybe it was too dusty in the basement. I did have allergies, so that made sense. Mom told me it was dangerous down there. If I wasn't careful, I could slip on the cement staircase and hit my head. But no matter how many times I reassured myself, I couldn't understand why it was them and not me. First, I didn't mind. I watched YouTube and played games until dinner. But then it started happening more often, sometimes for entire days. The house kept me locked in my room so I couldn't join in. Our family was rich, though I didn't realize how wealthy until I got older. I was under the naive impression that every 7-year-old had their own private chef. Of course, it wasn't our wealth, it was the house's. But we were told from little kids that the inheritance was ours. The four of us grew up inside a house with a soul, an ancient boarding school refurbished into a modern family home. It was the perfect setting for endless games of hide and seek. When I did join in with my siblings, it was a lot of fun. But while playing our own games, there was an old piece of paper behind a painting. Children, it only summoned my siblings' names. Prepare for the basement games. The rules stated that each of them had to participate after breakfast until dinner. They couldn't leave the basement under any circumstances, and I wasn't allowed to join. It felt harsh, but I wasn't a confrontational kid, so I stayed quiet. One night, my little sister Mari climbed into my bed. I was used to it. There was a spider on her ceiling maybe a year prior, and since then she was convinced the spider's eggs were going to crawl into her mouth. She wrapped her arms around me, her body trembling, and whispered that she was scared. Mari didn't talk about the basement games, but as she leaned closer, her icy breath brushed my ear. I could hear the slight tremble in her voice. I don't like the basement games anymore, Belle, she whispered, burying her in my pillow, hiding in a halo of tangled red curls. Mari was so cold, shivering in her ice cream-themed pajamas. I wasn't a fan of my siblings marching down to the basement with no questions, almost like they were in a trance. The house had taken them down to the basement at breakfast, and they missed lunch. I asked our chef, Stella, if I could take them California rolls for a snack. Stella seemed happy to help, letting me pour them onto a plate and count 3 each for my siblings, and an extra one for me. But when I placed the food on the countertop, they were immediately dumped in the trash. "Where's Stella?" I asked, trying to ignore the trash can emptying itself. I had gotten used to our kitchen appliances moving on their own. "Stella has gone home early," the house told me through scattering refrigerator magnets. "She is not feeling well, Isabella." But I never saw Stella again. We had a new chef the next day, Dimitri. I didn't like the house's obsession with my siblings. The 3 of them had been down there all day, and it wasn't until Mari crept into my room did the vicious knot in my gut start to loosen. They had finally come out of the basement. I felt myself start to relax, sinking into my pillow and my sister's embrace, before a thought hit me. Roman and Nick. I didn't hear their footsteps pound past my bedroom, and I knew I would have heard them. Our 2 brothers were always way too loud, always making noise and bouncing on their beds at bedtime. Nick was older than me by a year, so he usually instigated it, while Roman was younger, copying everything he did. The morning prior, Nick announced to everyone he was done eating vegetables. Ignoring the maid's hiss for him to sit down, he jumped onto a chair, making a scene. "I'm 8 years old now, and I'm old enough to know that vegetables suck. Roman, 2 years younger than him and obsessed with copying every little thing he did, was halfway through a plate of broccoli before jumping up, exclaiming, "Me too," through a mouthful of mushy green. I lay on my side, resting my head on my favorite elephant plushie. "Did our brothers come back upstairs too?" I whispered. I didn't like the faraway, dazed look in my sister's eyes. I had to repeat the question before she finally stared at me, blinking rapidly. Mari shook her head, illuminated by the glow of my bedside lamp. My little sister's eyes grew wide with fear, stray strands of red hair clinging to her cheeks. She grabbed my blankets and threw them over herself, crawling underneath and using me for warmth. Mari usually climbed into my bed when she was feeling sick or had watched a scary movie. Reaching for my plushie, she hugged it tightly to her chest for comfort. I was usually very strict about her touching my stuffed animals, but for this one time I let her hold onto him for a little longer before tugging him from her grasp. "No," she said softly, "they haven't won the game yet." Something slimy crept its way up my throat, my tummy twisting into knots. As Mari's big sister, I had an unspoken, unofficial job to protect her, even if, at that point, I really didn't want to see the monster in the basement. Mom and Dad were away, and our sitter was fast asleep. So, it was my duty to find the monster scaring my siblings. It was usually Nick's job to protect all of us, but with him stuck downstairs playing the basement game, I had to put on my big girl pants and do it myself. I tucked my sister into my bed. "Do you want me to check on them?" Mari didn't respond, but she did jerk her head slightly. So, I grabbed my iPad as a flashlight, pulling it from my stuffed animal drawer. I took a moment to check on my brother's rooms. Nick's was a mess, books and clothes and play slime covering the floor. But everything was clean. His books were nearly organized, all of his toys piled into the corner. Nick never made his bed. Even when the maid cleaned up his room, he made sure to mess it up to get Mom and Dad's attention. But his bed was perfectly made, all of his stuffed animals lined up on his pillows. I left my older brother's room with a sickly feeling in my gut. Taking the downstairs steps one at a time, I made my way down to the ground floor, running past the previous floors. Nick once told me the story of the dead kid who haunted the second floor, and my imagination was definitely playing tricks on me. The ground floor was too dark. I crept into the kitchen, standing on my tiptoes to switch the light on. Mari said the house wouldn't let my brothers out of the basement, but they were probably hungry, so I grabbed snacks for them. I took my time making sure to add their favorites. Roman liked chocolate, so I dropped 2 candy bars into a small bowl. Nick was always fighting me for mini cocktail sausages, so, opening the refrigerator, I picked some out for him. Before I could close the door, however, I noticed something new sitting on the top shelf. It didn't look like food, a squeezy bottle of something poking from a small white box. I thought it was medicine, maybe for my allergies, but when I grasped for it, it was squishy in my hands. Yogurt or milkshake. I hated the texture, it instantly reminded me of jelly. I put it exactly where I'd found it, shutting the refrigerator door. I finally rounded the basement door, half of a cracker hanging out of my mouth. I tried the curved handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. Pulling it open, I slowly made my way down ice-cold concrete steps, wincing at the sensation on my bare toes. The old wooden door at the very bottom, however, was locked. When I risked knocking quietly, a familiar squeak caught me off guard. The door groaned, and I heard movement followed by a resounding knock. When I risked knocking quietly, a familiar squeak caught me off guard. The door groaned, and I heard movement followed by a resounding knock. His voice was a sharp cry writhing with sobs. "The monster! It's going to get me!" I held my breath, clutching the bowl of snacks to my chest. "It's me," I whispered. "Belle?" I could hear my older brother's heavy sobs, his attempts to gag them with his fist. "What are you doing down here?" I swallowed a shriek twisting in my throat. "I have snacks." "I don't want snacks." I had never heard my brother cry. Nick was always the one teasing us for crying. I remember being scared of something in his cry, a tinge of something I didn't understand. I didn't realize I was shaking until I looked down at my own quaking hands, illuminated by the flickering bulb above. When I dared lean forward, Something coppery filled my nose, thick and wrong and almost wet. The door jolted, groaning against the hinge, and I heard my brother slump to his knees, his head resting against the other side. "I don't want to play anymore," he whispered, his usually calm demeanor shattering as he let out a wet-sounding sob. "Belle, tell it to let me out now." His breath hitched. "The monster. It's going to eat me." Nick's cry dropped into a whimper. "Please, please, 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 please," he emphasized each plea, slamming his fists into old wood. "Please." His breaths were ragged. "I feel sick, Belle," he sobbed. "I feel sick. I feel sick. I feel sick. The monster is going to eat me." When the door bounced under the hinge, pressured by his weight, I found myself already taking stumbled steps back. "Nick," I found my voice, swiping at my eyes. "Where's Roman?" His response sent me staggering back, almost tripping over the bottom step. "Who's Roman?" "Isabella." The booming voice creeping inside my skull sent me twisting around, a shriek tumbling from my mouth. I dropped the bowl of snacks, ceramic flowers shattering on impact, the contents, candy and mini sausages hitting the ground. The harsh click of the door locking sent me stumbling back. The house was mad. When a single beam of light hit the stairs, I ran back up them, dove through the door, and slammed the door behind me. I didn't want to look, but from the soft clicking sounds, the house was addressing me. This time, the refrigerator magnets neatly spelled out, "Good night, Isabella," smiley face. I ran upstairs, diving into my bed and throwing my pillow over my head. The warmth of my sister had gone, leaving my sheets cold. I knew her door was locked, and the house wasn't going to let me inside. The next morning, I walked into a brewing argument between Roman and Mari over breakfast. Nick was in his usual seat, picking at his pancakes. I took a seat in front of him, immediately leaning forward. "Are you okay?" I whispered, offering him my granola bar. Nick didn't look up from his cereal, stirring frosted flakes into a soupy mess. Yes, he cocked his head, frowning at me through half-lidded eyes. I lowered my voice. "Did the house let you leave the basement?" Nick scooped frosted flakes into his mouth, milk dribbling down his chin. His eyes confused me, amusement and slight annoyance. "What?" he said through a mouthful. "What are you talking about, weirdo?" When I opened my mouth to respond, he giggled. "Belle is being weird again," he said loudly. "Mom." Belle is like drooling into my cereal. He pulled his bowl back in a violent jerk. "You're getting all your disgusting drool in my frosted flakes. Gross." Roman turned in his seat, his face smeared with chocolate. He shot me a grin full of candy mush. "Drool-flavored cereal. Icky drool-flavored cereal." Mari joined in, laughing. "Belle is secretly a panda bear." Nick dropped his spoon with a snort, reaching for his juice and drowning the glass. "Panda bears don't drool, stupid head." "I'm not a stupid head." Mari hit the table, throwing a grape at him. He shot one back. I watched it bounce against her cheek. "Well, maybe you're just dumb, Maribel. Stupid heads are dumb." I caught her grabbing a fistful of pancakes and braced myself. "Nicholas," Mom warned from the other room. She was working in her office, but always managed to hear the four of us perfectly. The three of them collapsed into a fight. Mari instigated it, catapulting a pancake in Nick's face. He hit back with his cereal. Roman jumped onto a chair, cheering his brother on. I left the table with a tummy ache. I asked Mari what the games were, but she went significantly pale and immediately changed the subject. When I tried to ask questions, the house introduced a new rule. This time, using Mari's SpaghettiOs, no talking about the basement games. My siblings weren't allowed to tell me anything. So, that was when I started to resent the house I lived in. Growing older, the basement games continued, but my siblings had no memories of them. When I was 10 years old, I risked it again and snuck down to the basement, this time armed with a key I found sandwiched in the back of a painting. But when I opened the door, I didn't even get to see inside, before I was being violently tugged back, the door slamming in my face. This time, however, I did manage to see the shadow of my little brother huddled in the corner, knees to his chest. I turned 13 when the house revealed its full wealth to us. It made it a game as usual, and this time I was allowed to participate. If you eat your veggies, you'll be getting your full inheritance. Isabella, it would whisper in my ear when I was refusing to eat slimy-looking lettuce. When I did well at school, I was rewarded with unlocked doors and a vague voice inside my head. You are so close to my inheritance, Isabella. As a teenager, I continued to investigate the basement games. But by now, my brothers and sister were completely on board with these games. They were part of their daily routine, and there were no questions or complaints. The house had completely brainwashed them. I woke up and had breakfast, and when I was getting ready for school, I would see my brothers in their school uniforms marching down to the basement, with Mari falling in line. I never understood why they bothered getting ready for school when they didn't even go. When I returned from school, the house was always silent, but I knew they were down there playing the basement games. The three always appeared at the exact same time every night when I was having supper. Mari would join me, followed by Nick and finally Roman. As a teenager, I knew not to question the basement games or what they had been doing all day. If not, my bedroom would start to fold on itself. Doors would appear on the hallway, half open, an eerie red light bleeding through. I was on constant autopilot, too scared to say anything at all, especially when my siblings seemed unchanged. Nick nudged me with his hip when I ducked my head, trying to shovel cold pasta in my mouth before Dimitri piled more on my plate. I ventured once again into the basement, easily bypassing the lock. This time I saw clinical white light. The room was empty except Mari sitting on a small plastic chair. She didn't speak initially, her eyes half-lidded, straying strands of red hair sticking to her forehead. Mari, I whispered, inching closer. What are you doing? She didn't even look at me, her eyes unseeing. I'm hunting the monster. Slowly, she pulled a blade from behind her, wrapping her fingers around the hilt. It's behind you, she sang, swinging the knife. She dived forwards, swinging the blade at me, but her eyes were somewhere else entirely. Mari didn't move or blink the whole time, and when I was slowly reaching out for her trembling hands, I was being yanked back. The house sent me back to my room with no explanation. I tried to squirm back inside before lights started flickering. Water started running. Sharp whispers filled my head, screeching into my skull. Okay, I clamped my hands over my ears. Okay, I give up. I went back to my room, and once I stepped inside, my door slammed shut. The next morning, I was met with the same. They acted like nothing happened. Nick was 14, so he was completely insufferable at the breakfast table. What's your problem? He pulled my plate from me with a grin. When I couldn't bring myself to smile back, he rolled his eyes and blew a raspberry. Fine, I can ignore you too. He turned away from me, pulling his knees to his chest and shoving Roman off of his chair. Our youngest brother was 11 and also a crybaby. He'd burst into tears at the slightest prodding. Nick liked pushing his buttons, but Roman also had anger issues and was impulsive, often reacting before thinking. When he toppled off of the chair, he jumped up, red-faced, swinging his fist directly into his older brother's jaw. What the fuck? Nick squeaked, nursing his jaw. Nick had gotten a little too used to swearing. He hit back with a yell, but was surprisingly the weakest brother. Roman was already waiting for a strike back. Before he could swing another punch, however, Dimitri, who had become an honorary father over the years, came running from the kitchen, already used to our BS. Dimitri had to pull them apart before they killed each other. I hated them, I thought dizzily, my head spinning. Mari shot me a grin across the table. I hated her, my own sister, for lying to me, but it wasn't just lying, it was being oblivious that they were lying. She was under the house's spell. Roman was hyperactive the majority of the time, acting like he was on permanent fast forward. But after the basement games, I would notice him sitting eerily quiet, not saying a word until Nick antagonized him. Dead, almost vacant eyes, just like Mari's. Like he wasn't really there. The basement games started to last for days, and I realized our house was the real monster. Sometimes, I wouldn't see my siblings for a whole week, and I was terrified. They had been acting less and less like themselves, like they were starting to shatter, coming apart piece by piece. They were like mannequins, sitting with me and eating super, but there was nobody there. Nick turned from a sociable 17-year-old to a dead-eyed doll sitting next to me, staring down at his food, pale and shivering in sweltering summer temperatures. They even stopped eating. Roman started wearing shades all the time, even inside. Nick avoided the outside, stalking around like the undead. His room resembled a cave. I couldn't take it anymore. I was going crazy, so I reported it to the cops. I told them everything about the house's basement games. I was interviewed by a woman with a kind smile who offered me chocolate milk and told me to take my time. I was halfway through my anecdote about the monster Mari talked about when a second cop wandered into the room and shook his head. The woman's smile started to shrink, and she stopped offering me drinks. Apparently, 2 officers had visited my parents, while 2 were interviewing my siblings. According to one officer, our house didn't have a basement. He also informed me that my own sister had laughed off my claims and insisted that I had a vivid imagination and liked attention. The female officer wore a tight smile. "You have quite the imagination," she said, lightly shoving me out of her office, where I stumbled directly into an all too familiar face. Nick, wearing his private school uniform, he was all smiles in front of the adults before leading me away, his grip tightening on my arm. He was hurting me and didn't even notice. When I cried out, he grabbed me again, sticking his nails in the exact same place. Nick had changed drastically over the course of his senior year. He was snappier, his tone cold and to the point. It wasn't until we were halfway down the street when he dug deeper, like he was trying to hurt me. I caught his gritted teeth. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" he hissed. "I've just spent 3 hours explaining our house is not actually alive." "But it is," I whispered, and he looked away. "Yes, and it's a family secret," Nick grumbled. "Also, not exactly something we can just blurt out." He scoffed. "Ooh, by the way, did you know our house is alive?" He mocked my voice with a nasal snort. "Do you want to look insane?" When we got home, Mari was waiting for me. She didn't speak, turning and walking away. Roman jumped out of nowhere, throwing a moldy orange in my face. "Yo, Belle," he grinned, before grasping his own throat, pretending to choke himself. "No, the house is trying to kill me. I don't want to die in the basement games." To our surprise, the house did actually respond, shining a spotlight on my brother, like it was laughing at me. To my horror, Rowan stood, grinning wildly, illuminated in harsh white light. He ended his theatrics with an eye roll. "You must be desperate for attention, sis." I finally found my voice, caught in a shriek. "What are you talking about?" I lost myself in a laugh that twisted into a sob. I twisted to face both of them. Years of pent-up frustration, fear, and constantly, swallowing it down and smiling, spilling out like magma. I felt it scorching my veins, a rich, burning heat bathing my face. "You've been playing the basement games since we were kids. This house has been brainwashing you since we were little, and somehow, I'm the crazy one." Tears fell freely, but neither of my brothers seemed fazed, their dark eyes glued to me. I turned to Roman. "I saw you. I saw Mari. And you can't say it's not real because you're different. You're different. And I lose a piece of you every day." I heaved a breath. "Every time you go down those stairs, you change, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what this place is doing to you, and it's driving me insane. And now you're trying to tell me these games aren't real." Suddenly, I couldn't breathe, watching my brothers exchange amused glances like I was fucking crazy. I lost myself somewhere between grabbing a ceramic horse from an old cabinet and throwing it on the floor, a screech escaping my mouth, one I couldn't swallow or bite back, an unhealthy cry that sent me to my knees, sobbing. "Don't you remember? When it trapped you in the basement. When you didn't remember Roman's name." Nick didn't move. "This house has been fucking with your head," I said, swallowing another sob, forcing my fists into my eyes. There was a pause. The only sound was my disgusting, snotty sobbing. "Jesus fucking Christ," Nick finally muttered. He turned away from me, pivoting on his heel. Get therapy or leave, he said. I don't need your weird fantasies ruining our chances. Took me a moment to realize what he meant. The inheritance. Instead of responding, I ran upstairs to pack my things. I was getting out of there. Whatever the house had done to my siblings wasn't happening to me. When I dragged my luggage downstairs, Mom was waiting for me on the ground floor. Isabel, she said, your father and I have been talking and think it would be best, right now, to send you overseas to boarding school until you turn 18. I could feel myself splintering again, the urge to scream at them choking in my throat when I realized there was no point. Isabella, Mom's voice echoed in my mind. Your father and I are worried about you. We just think it might be best for you. What about the basement games? I asked. Will they continue? Mom's expression crumpled. Isabella, I have no idea what you are talking about. I lost it, crumpling. Because you're never here, I spat. Maybe if you stopped working, you might have noticed that our house has brainwashed your children. Mom looked hurt, but I didn't mean it. Her job was mostly overseas. Mom and Dad couldn't help being away, and we usually had a sitter. Except the sitter didn't stop the house from playing its basement games. She shook her head, her lips tight. This is what I mean when I say we are worried about you, she sighed. Sweetie, boarding school will be good for your mind. That was the last time I saw my siblings. I went to boarding school for 3 years, cutting them out of my life. I wasn't a smart student, but our family inheritance offered my college of choice a worthy donation, so I could feel smart. I expected at least some contact with my siblings over the years, but there was none. I stayed with school friends for holidays and celebrated my birthday by getting wasted with someone else's ID. Uncle Simon was good for something, and that was his endless supply of cash. I was in my 2nd year of college when I got the call. Dimitri, the house is dead. Isabella, he said stiffly. The funeral will be next week. Please wear respectful colors and come alone, he paused. Please gather with your siblings to discuss your inheritance. For my own sanity, I chose not to attend. It was a fucking inanimate object for one. Also, I had no interest in going back to that house. I was brought up to think our sentient house was completely normal. But it wasn't. Of course, it fucking wasn't. I was expecting disappointment and maybe threats, and I was right. Aunt Daisy called me a freeloading witch and blocked my number. She really loved the house. I think I saw her massaging its walls when I was a kid. I did try and reconnect with my siblings, at least via phone, in my junior year at boarding school. I had a plan to get them out of the house and away from the basement games. I talked to my roommate about their behavior growing up, and she thought something completely different. She also noted what I found in the refrigerator when I was 7. Leaning forward, my roommate grasped my hands, squeezing tightly. What did the thing in the refrigerator look like? Can you describe it? It was a squeezy bottle, I said, but it felt like jelly? I don't know. It felt liquidy Y in my hand. She arched her brow. Liquidy Y? So, there wasn't a shot or maybe a small bottle. I thought back to the white box on the top shelf. No, it was just a squishy bottle. It was like jelly. My roommate didn't respond, leaning back, her gaze glued to me while I dialed my brother's number. He didn't answer. Nick's number was dead, and Mari's went straight to the dial tone. Roman's did ring, but it continued to ring and ring and ring and ring until I ended the call and cut contact with all 3 of them. I should have paid attention to my roommate's expression, because the next day, my school records were plastered over every bulletin board on campus, which also happened to detail the reason why I was sent there. Isabella suffered a breakdown. She has a colorful imagination and often lies to get attention from her family and peers. When she was 16, Isabella insisted her place of residence was alive and influencing her siblings. Despite this, she is a hard-working student and is making new friends. Underneath, scrawled in red, psycho bitch. I don't even know why I trusted the bitch with my private life. After that incident, I decided to leave my family in the past. That was until 1 year after my childhood home's funeral. I was a broke student, had no job, and my landlord was a month away from kicking me and my housemate out onto the street. There was a small white envelope waiting for me on the countertop when I pushed my janky door open. I knew what it was the second I checked the back. The house. I recognized the old calligraphy. Instead of my name, coordinates leading me back to its corpse. When I arrived, the door was already open, but I wasn't surprised. I was considered the least intelligent out of the four of us, and I did abandon them. I slipped through the door, suffocated with memories. The ground floor had not changed. It was still beautiful, oval-shaped, my mother's favorite chandelier looming above. When I turned around, I could see the height markers scribbled on the wall where Roman and I had measured our height. He was a toddler trying to jump to be as tall as me. So naturally, I marked him taller, probably because he wouldn't stop crying. Wow! The voice wasn't surprising, but I hated that at that moment I realized I missed it. I couldn't help my body suffering a visceral reaction, tears stinging my eyes. I thought he was dead. I thought the monster had killed him. Nick was standing in the doorway. As the oldest sibling at 23 years old, he definitely didn't look it. He hadn't aged a day. The worst part was that he looked exactly like the man the house was depicted as in all of the paintings in the main hallway, all the way down to the long trench coat and white-collared shirt, hands tucked into his pockets, sandy-colored curls pinned back by a pair of expensive-looking Ray-Bans. Nick was like a fucking Gen Z version of our monstrous house. But there was a silver lining. The dark shadows I saw on his teen self were gone. His eyes were full of life again, pricking with that energy he had as a kid. The vacant, almost cruel gleam was gone, replaced with amusement. I noticed his smile was a little too big. His sleeves were rolled up, a slight pinkish tinge speckling his cheeks. He took a step forward, swaying slightly. Nick tried to turn the light on, chuckling when it didn't spark. "Well, fuck," he spluttered. "Looks like this place is like super fucking dead." He did a little dance toward me, stumbling over his fancy shoes. Nicholas was drunk. "Sue, you purposely missed our house's funeral, and yet here you are, making sure you get your cut." His mouth upturned into a smirk. "I wasn't sure how low you could truly go, after, accused us of being monster hunters and then fucking abandoning us for 8 years, but wow, here you are, in the flesh." He cocked his head. "Did you get shorter?" I didn't care that he was being an asshole. In 3 stumbling steps, I was wrapping my arms around him, letting myself break apart. I felt his entire body stiffen, like he wasn't used to hugs, which was crazy because we hugged all the time as kids. I waited for him to push me away, but his hand came down on my back in an awkward pat. "Why did you leave us, Belle?" I didn't reply, and I think we both preferred that. Nick pulled away, and I caught him swiping his eyes. "We're in Dad's office," he muttered, gesturing for me to follow him. Nick led me onto the second floor and into our father's old study, where 2 strangers stood, surrounding Dad's desk. The redhead awkwardly perched on the edge, swinging her legs, could not be Mari. She was ethereal, scarlet hair tied into a ponytail, dressed in a white pantsuit. My sister didn't even look at me, her gaze glued to a loose thread on her lap. The promise I made her even when we were kids came back in the form of bile creeping up my throat. I left her with our house and its basement games. I left my little sister when she was already suffering. "Why is SHE here?" The guy leaning against a dusty curtain draped over the window with his arms folded could only be Roman. I last saw him as an empty-eyed mannequin staring straight through me. Roman had changed the least, still hiding behind thick dark hair and freckles. I didn't recognize the crest on his navy blazer, probably a private college overseas. No matter how hard he tried to hide it, my brother was still haunted by his childhood, already struggling to maintain eye contact with me, before averting his gaze with a derisive snort. He was the youngest, and as his older sister, I should have protected him from our house. That fact only hit me when his expression crumpled, his bottom lip wobbling. I looked away, my heart in my throat, my gaze finding the center of attention. The 2 single envelopes on Dad's desk. One was red, the other white. Nick snatched up the white one. My brother was ready to laugh, his eyes almost feral, lips spread into a grin. I could tell he'd been waiting for the inheritance since the house announced it. He was greedy, pulling the contents from the envelope. He started confidently. "Hello, children," Nick read out, mocking the house's booming voice. He kept reading, and slowly, I watched the color drain from my brother's face, his eyes adapting that exact same gleam, the one I was so afraid of, what I had run away from. Nick continued, speaking through a cough. "You four want my fortune so bad?" He dropped the letter, stumbling back, his eyes wide. "Fuck," he whispered, bending over and puking something slimy. "Fuck. Fuck. 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 What?" Roman straightened up. "What does it say?" Nick swiped at his mouth, spluttering. He was shaking. "It says to fucking kill each other," he said through a laugh. "The last one standing gets it all." He jumped up when Roman reached for the letter. "No, don't touch it. You fucking idiot. What if it's cursed?" Roman smirked. "Oh, Sawyer, it's cursed. You just want all the cash." "I'm not stupid." Nick stamped on the letter, his expression wild. "Did you forget we had a talking house growing up?" Something ice-cold crawled its way up my spine. Was this part of the basement games? Is that what the house had been preparing for? Nick stepped back, backing into the door, his eyes unseeing. "Fuck this. I'm not interested," he whispered. "You guys can fucking kill each other for its gold, but I'm done, alright? Have fun being literally cursed." With a heaving breath, he turned around, grasping for the handle. He twisted and pulled, but it didn't open. "It's locked." Nick spoke the words softly, before something twitched in his expression, and I remembered the night the house locked him in the basement. With the monster, he kicked the door, choking on a cry. Another kick, and he was trembling, pounding his fists into old grains. "Fuck! Dimitri, you bastard! Let us out of here!" Mari stepped forward to help him, but in the time it took for me to open my mouth to speak, my little sister swiped a glass from the desk, shattered it on the edge, and plunged the skewed edges through Nick's skull. "Oh, you bitch," he spluttered, blood pooling from his lips. I watched his hands loosen around the handle before falling limp. Nick didn't speak or cry out, scarlet seeping through his lips, before he dropped onto the floor, dead. I could see the swimming red around him, blood pooling around my sneakers. Mari blinked, the glass slipping from her fingers, her mouth parting in a silent cry. She was covered in him, her white pantsuit painted in vivid scarlet, blood splatters on her cheek. She staggered back, her hands going to her mouth. "Nick! Oh God, I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean to." "Bullshit." Roman was screaming. I didn't realize until all of us did. Nick was dead, and one of us was getting the fortune. Roman was already diving onto my back, in an attempt to kill me, but he slipped off, hitting the ground. More blood, this time running fresh under my feet. "Roman?" I found my voice, and Mari broke into sobs. Roman had landed, throat first, on a particularly large shard of glass. He was dead. Mari was suddenly swinging at me with her weapon, clumsy and impulsive, before she tripped, her head protruding through a thick shard of glass. When Mari's body hit the floor, joining Nick and Roman, I could do nothing but crawl, my siblings' blood wet on my hands and legs. I tried the door. Locked. I screamed for help, before remembering the red letter and snatching it up. I tore into it way too fast, adrenaline forcing my body into autopilot. I sliced my finger on the edge, but I barely felt the sting. Fuck. A single bead of blood landed on yellowed paper. Paper cut. The house's handwriting was scrawled across the page. "To my darling children, I have enjoyed playing games with you. The answers to your birth and death are on these premises. I leave you both a blessing and a curse. Use it well for the upcoming games to claim my fortune." Movement caught me off guard. Mari's body twitched. I thought it was a trick of the light, but then her hand moved. Then her leg. Her eyelids flickered. Roman's head jolted back, the horrific sound of snapping bones filling my ears. I kept hold of the letter, inching toward the door. "And to Isabella, the illegitimate daughter. Just as I thought, your siblings would self-destruct. I've played out many different scenarios, but this one was most likely. Nick's arrogance, Mari's impulsiveness and Roman's overconfidence leave you, my heir. If you can complete my final game, that is, I leave you my wisdom and a new game. You have been wanting to take part for a while now. Well, here you are. The door is locked. Survive your newborn siblings and take everything for yourself. I flipped over the letter, caught off guard by Nick's entire body shifting, an animalistic snarl ripping from his newly elongated teeth. He rose like an animal, like a puppet on strings. I couldn't call his eyes human. His gaze was unfocused, confused, before he dropped to his knees, immediately slurping pooling scarlet from the floor. I heard every greedy gulp, every animalistic moan, his body twitching, bones snapping. The lock on the door clicked, swinging open. I had no choice but to run. The main door was locked, of course it was. I had no choice but to stay in the house. It's an hour later and it's too quiet. I hear them on the other side of the door. They're going to fucking kill me. I don't know what this house has turned them into, but I'm sure it's part of the basement games. Everything that happened down there leads to right now. I'm hiding in the main lounge. I don't think they know how to open the door yet, but I'm fucking terrified when and if they open this door. All three of them are going to rip me and themselves apart for this fortune.